My name is Stedman Graham, and I've always believed that family, no matter how flawed, was supposed to protect you, to stand beside you when the world fell apart, to choose you even when it was hard. But what happens when it's your own family who betrays you? When they not only watch you break, but help shatter you? I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would say, "My sister tried to steal my husband," or "My mother chose her over me." And I certainly never thought I'd be the one paying for it. But here we are. I wasn't always bitter. In fact, I used to be proud of how generous I was. I worked hard, built a career from the ground up. I'm a single parent and a full-time CTO at a startup that nearly collapsed during the pandemic. I survived every bump, every betrayal, every bad day. And I did it without asking for much. All I wanted was a little loyalty, a little respect, a little decency. But instead, I got Rachel, my younger sister, and a mother who sees me not as a daughter but as a wallet. I used to trust Rachel. We weren't best friends, but I believed there was love there, until she crossed a line that no one comes back from. She started getting too close to my husband, Ben, during our rough patch. At first I thought I was imagining things, lingering looks, laughs that lasted too long, the way she leaned into him during family dinners like I wasn't even there. I told myself I was paranoid, overworked, stressed from being the only adult holding our house, our child, and our lives together. But then I walked in on them, not in bed, not in some steamy embrace, worse, in the emotional mess that precedes the affair, that quiet, intimate whispering only reserved for lovers. And I knew. Ben didn't deny it. Rachel? She didn't apologize. She just said, "You never really saw him anyway." I kicked him out the next day, and she followed shortly after, into his arms. Divorce was brutal. Not because I missed Ben, but because I had to fight for every ounce of peace. I fought for our son, Lucas, for our house, for the stability I had built with blood and bone. And I won. But it cost me more than just lawyer fees. It cost me my family. Because when Rachel and Ben got together officially, our mother made a decision. She sided with Rachel. "She's younger," she said. "She didn't know what she was doing. She was confused. She didn't mean to hurt you. And worst of all, she deserves happiness too." Like my pain was some small inconvenience in her fairy tale. I distanced myself, not just for my sanity, but for Lucas. I couldn't let him grow up thinking betrayal was normal, that love meant allowing people to stomp on your boundaries. So I kept things polite, brief, and strictly on my terms. And for a while that worked, until Rachel announced her engagement. To a rich lawyer. Not Ben, they didn't last. Apparently cheaters don't trust each other. No, this was a new man, one with wealth, power, and an ego just as inflated as her dreams. And suddenly my mother, the same woman who called me selfish for cutting Rachel off, was calling me every day. Not to reconnect, not to apologize, but to ask for money. "I know you're doing well, Stedman," she said sweetly, "and Rachel's wedding is going to be expensive." I stared at my phone in disbelief. "You're joking. She's your sister, and weddings are a family affair. Everyone contributes." I almost laughed. I contributed when she wrecked my marriage. "Stedman, she's marrying someone with a 6-figure salary and a penthouse view. Why does she need my money?" "Because you're the big sister and you're successful. You have a good job, a stable life." "Because I earned it. Because I clawed my way here, alone." There was a pause. Then she said, "So you won't help your own family?" And that was when it clicked. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. I said no, firmly, finally. And just like that, the rest of the family turned cold. Cousins stopped calling. Uncles forgot birthdays. My mother blocked me for a week, then unblocked me just long enough to send a group text saying, "Some people only care about themselves." It would have been funny if it wasn't so familiar, because that's what they do. They paint me as cold, not because I am, but because I refuse to bleed for people who'd let me die. Lucas is the only reason I keep going some days. He's 10 now. Bright, curious, sensitive in ways that remind me how much damage one betrayal can do. I've spent years shielding him from the dysfunction, from the toxic dynamics I grew up drowning in. But it's getting harder, because now he's old enough to ask questions. Why don't we go to Grandma's house? Why doesn't Aunt Rachel visit? And hardest of all, why doesn't Daddy come to my soccer games? I always answer the same way. Because not everyone who's supposed to love you knows how. After Rachel's engagement party, which I wasn't invited to, I heard from an old friend, Sarah, someone who knew us both in college. "I ran into Rachel," she said. I braced myself. She bragged about how she got the man, the ring, the spotlight, and how you're still bitter. I felt my chest tighten. "She called you the boring one, said you were always too serious to be fun." Sarah paused. "She hasn't changed, has she?" I laughed softly. "No, but I have." "Good," she said, "because you deserve a story that doesn't revolve around her. And maybe that's what this is. The moment I stop waiting for an apology. Stop pretending I'll ever be the daughter they wanted, the sister they respected, the person they'd protect. And instead, become the version of me that doesn't need them at all. I didn't go to the bridal shower, didn't send a gift, didn't offer congratulations, didn't pretend. And you know what? The sky didn't fall. No lightning bolt struck me down for being unkind. But something else happened. I slept, really slept, for the first time in months. No guilt dreams, no imagined fights in my head, just silence. Peace. But peace is a short guest in a family like mine. It didn't take long before my mother showed up at my house, unannounced. I heard the doorbell and looked through the peephole, heart already pounding. She stood there with a Tupperware of lemon bars like this was some casual neighborly drop-in. Lucas wasn't home, thank God. I opened the door a crack. "Hi, Mom." She smiled, that same sweet, weaponized expression I'd grown up decoding. "Can I come in?" I paused, then stepped aside. She walked in like she owned the place, as if nothing had happened. "Still so tidy," she said, glancing around. "You always were my little perfectionist." I crossed my arms. "Why are you here?" She blinked, offended at my tone. "To talk." "I'm listening." She sighed and set the lemon bars down like a peace offering. "Rachel's hurt." I raised an eyebrow. "She's humiliated. She told me you've been ignoring her, not replying. She's trying to reach out." "No," I said flatly. "She's trying to rewrite the story so she doesn't have to feel bad." "Stedman, I'm not funding her wedding, and I'm not pretending we're okay." Her voice dropped, colder now. "So you're really going to hold a grudge forever?" I stepped closer. "She tried to steal my husband. She opened her mouth, and you let her." She shut it. "Finally, for once. You taught her that consequences were optional, that she could do anything and someone would still clean up the mess. I'm not doing it anymore." I walked to the door and opened it. "You can leave the lemon bars, but not the guilt." She didn't speak. She just left. I didn't cry, but I did shake. Sometimes strength doesn't feel like a roar. It feels like standing still while the storm rages around you. The next blow came from Ben. Of course, he had been quiet since the divorce, mostly out of convenience. He didn't want custody, didn't want to pay child support, didn't want to face the wreckage he helped create. But now he was suddenly interested in being involved. It started with an email. "I'd like to see Lucas more. I want to do this right." I almost choked on my coffee. This man, who had skipped birthdays, ignored parent-teacher meetings, and couldn't even remember his own son's shoe size, wanted shared custody. Because he was remarried now, to Sophie, a woman I barely knew, but who had once shared a gym membership with Rachel. The timing felt off, so I called my lawyer. We reviewed the documents. Ben wasn't just requesting visitation. He wanted to adjust the custody agreement and reduce his financial responsibility. Classic. "What are my options?" I asked. My lawyer, a brilliant woman named Marianne, didn't sugarcoat it. "If you don't contest it, the court may assume you're agreeing." "I want to contest." "Then let's get ready." It felt surreal sitting in that courtroom weeks later, watching Ben lie with ease, painting himself as a misunderstood father who just wanted more time. He looked clean-cut, shiny shoes, new ring on his finger. Sophie sat behind him, one hand resting on a baby bump. "A baby bump?" I leaned in to my attorney. "She's pregnant?" Marianne nodded slowly. "They didn't disclose that until this morning." And just like that, it all made sense. He didn't want Lucas. He wanted a clean slate. He wanted fewer payments, fewer reminders, more money for the family he'd chosen. Lucas? Just collateral damage. I didn't stay quiet. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly. I described Lucas's schedule, his therapist, his learning needs. I outlined Ben's absences, his missed holidays, the times Lucas waited by the door with his backpack, only to be stood up. I didn't yell, didn't break. I just told the truth. And sometimes the truth is enough. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only was custody maintained, Ben's support was increased due to his new household income. As for Sophie, well, turns out she wasn't just pregnant. She was also caught in a quiet paternity scandal. A mutual friend reached out 2 days later. "She's been texting her ex," the message read, "and he's not thrilled about being the biological dad." I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it. But I did take Lucas out for ice cream that night. Just the two of us. Later, as we sat watching a movie, Lucas leaned into me. "I'm glad it's just us," he whispered. And in that moment, I knew I'd done the right thing. He didn't need perfect. He needed present, and I could be that. Every day. Weeks passed. Rachel's wedding buzz was everywhere. Mutual acquaintances posted dress fittings, rehearsal dinners, champagne brunches. I avoided social media as much as possible. But then I got tagged in a post. By accident, I think. It was a group photo of Rachel with her bridesmaids. And there, in the comments, was something that made my blood run cold. Can't believe her sister didn't show up, so selfish. I stared at it. It had been liked dozens of times. Some of the names? Family. People who knew exactly what happened, and chose to pretend anyway. That night, I unfollowed them all. Blocked the ones who had been silent too long. Grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from clarity. Sarah invited me out for drinks that weekend. "You're glowing," she said, handing me a lemon drop martini. I laughed. "I think I'm just done bleeding for people who never offered a bandage." She raised her glass. "To bleeding no more." We clinked, and I meant it. A few days later, I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. At first it was messy, rambling, half-formed thoughts. But then it became something more, a blueprint, a map of how I'd rebuilt myself, one honest entry at a time. I didn't know it then, but I was writing the beginning of a new life. Not just for me, but for every woman who'd ever been told she was too much, or not enough. Every woman forced to carry a family that never carried her back. I was writing my freedom. And for once, I couldn't wait to see what came next. I didn't expect the journal entries to turn into anything. At first, it was just venting. Private thoughts scribbled into a leather notebook, half the pages dog-eared and coffee-stained. But then, I started noticing patterns. The entries weren't just stories of survival. They were roadmaps, truth bombs, declarations. I began typing them into my laptop, cleaning them up, stitching them together. Not as a memoir, not as revenge, but as a guide for other women, other parents, other people who had been dismissed and diminished by the very people who should have had their back. I called it The Strong One. What happens when you stop saying yes? I didn't think anyone would read it, but I posted the first few chapters on a private blog. Anonymous. No names, no photos, just raw truth. And it exploded. Comments flooded in within hours. Women from all over the country wrote, "This is my life. I've never told anyone, but my sister did the same. Thank you for making me feel seen." It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying, I told Sarah. She insisted I take it further. "You've got something here," she said. "This isn't just healing, it's helping." So I bought a domain, uploaded the blog properly, and this time I used my real name, Stedman Graham. No more hiding. A week later, I got an email from a small publishing house. They wanted to talk. Turns out, one of their editors had stumbled across my blog through a friend. She read every post in one night. And she wasn't just interested in the story, she was invested in me. The meeting was short, but powerful. They offered a deal, not massive, but honest. A fair advance, creative control, room to grow. And for the first time, I said yes to something that wasn't about survival. It was about creating. Meanwhile, Rachel's marriage didn't last long. 4 months in, her new husband was caught in a financial scandal. Shady real estate deals, offshore accounts, whispered fraud. Suddenly, the lifestyle she'd flaunted evaporated. She moved back in with our mother. I found out through a friend of a friend. And no, I didn't call her, didn't send a text, didn't offer a shoulder. Because healing doesn't require you to forget. It just requires you to choose peace over poison. One afternoon, I sat with Lucas at the park. He was building a fort out of sticks with 2 new friends from school. I watched from the bench, sipping tea, letting the breeze ease into my shoulders. A woman sat beside me. We'd spoken before, fellow single mom, divorced last year. Her name was Amanda. She leaned over and said, "Hey, I think I read your article." I turned, "What?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. It was my blog post, shared by a parenting group on Facebook. "I didn't realize it was you," she said, "but I've read every word." I smiled, "Thank you." She looked at me carefully. "You don't know what it meant, hearing someone finally say the things we're taught to bury." I nodded. "I do." That night I got a call from my father. He doesn't call often. Mostly birthdays, sometimes Christmas. But this was different. "Hey kid," he said, "I read your blog." I froze. "You did?" "Yeah, your mom showed it to me." "Of course she did." "She was upset," he added gently. "I bet." He paused. "I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you." I didn't expect that. Not from him. He wasn't cruel growing up, just absent, emotionally elsewhere. But this mattered. "You went through hell," he continued, voice rough, "and you made something beautiful out of it." "Thanks, Dad." We didn't say much more. But when I hung up, I cried. Not from pain, but from something like relief. Some wounds don't get stitches, but they still stop bleeding. Eventually. Then came the panel invitation. A Women in Tech event wanted me to speak, not just as a CTO, but as an advocate for work-life balance, for parenting under pressure, for boundary setting as power. I almost declined. Imposter syndrome is real. But I remembered something I wrote in my journal. "You're not too much. They were just never enough." So I said yes, and I showed up. I wore a red blazer and my favorite heels. I spoke like I was talking to one version of myself, the one who thought saying no made her cruel, the one who kept paying everyone else's emotional bills. The audience leaned in, took notes. Some cried, and afterward a woman my age approached me. She shook my hand and said, "You just gave me permission to start over." I went home that night and told Lucas, "I did something brave today." He smiled. "I'm not surprised." And just like that, I realized I was no longer surviving. I was thriving, and I wasn't alone. I had built a community, a space where women could be both soft and strong, where we could speak, rage, forgive, walk away, come back on our terms, and where the narrative wasn't controlled by the ones who hurt us. It was ours now. Lucas turned 11 in April. We kept it simple, just a backyard cookout, a homemade chocolate cake, and a few close friends from school. No lavish parties, no rented bounce castles, just real joy, real laughter, and people who truly loved him. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years, because for once I wasn't performing. I wasn't worried about appearances, or who might judge, or who might gossip about me behind my back. I wasn't explaining myself. I was just there, fully present, fully whole, fully proud of the little family I'd protected and nurtured through fire. After the party, I sat on the back porch, watching Lucas run around with his friends while the sun dipped behind the trees. Sarah came out with 2 glasses of lemonade and sat next to me. "You know," she said, "you could have disappeared after everything. Curled up, closed off." I smiled. I wanted to. "But you didn't. You turned the ashes into something." I nodded. "Still smells like smoke some days." She laughed. "Sure, but now you know it's not the end. Just a signal that something new's about to start." She was right, because what came next was mine to write. The book launched in June. The Strong One hit the shelves with a modest marketing push. Nothing fancy, just word of mouth and an interview or two. And still, it sold out in the first week. Messages poured in. Emails, DMs, book clubs tagging me on Instagram. I got invited to speak at another panel, this one for mental health and motherhood. I was stunned, not by the success, but by the way people showed up. They weren't clapping for my pain. They were cheering for my courage. That's a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't burn out. One day, Lucas came home with a school project. "Who inspires you most?" He chose me. I found the paper crumpled in his backpack, covered in glitter and blue marker. He wrote, "My mom is strong. She protects people. She builds things. She doesn't let people be mean. She tells the truth even when it's scary." I sat in the kitchen and cried, not from sadness, but from this deep, silent knowing. I had broken the cycle. He wouldn't grow up thinking love meant sacrificing yourself. He wouldn't mistake manipulation for care. He would know better, because I had done better. Rachel emailed me in late summer. Subject, apology? That question mark said everything. I opened it anyway. "Stedman, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I've been reading your work. I see now what I couldn't before. I blamed you for having boundaries because I never learned to have my own. I thought attention was love, so I took what wasn't mine. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. You don't have to respond. I just needed to say it." I closed the laptop and stared out the window. It didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring me rage either. It just brought stillness. For the first time, her words didn't feel like knives. They felt like something laid down. Like the war had ended, not with victory, not with surrender, but with a ceasefire of honesty. I didn't respond. But I didn't delete the email either. Some things don't need a reply. Some peace comes in silence. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. From my mother. No flowers, no lemon bars, no passive-aggressive undercurrent. Just a single-page handwritten note. "You were right. I didn't protect you. I didn't know how. But that's no excuse. I read your book. I saw the version of you I never bothered to understand. And I'm sorry. I know I have no claim on your life now, but I hope you know I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late for you and me." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in a small keepsake box with Lucas's drawing and a few photos I had almost thrown away years ago. Not because I was sentimental, but because this was part of the story too. The part where truth replaces performance, where accountability begins, even if reconciliation never does. I didn't go back. I didn't reach out. But I also didn't shut down. Because forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet release of expecting someone to ever become who they should have been. Lucas started middle school in the fall. He walked in confident, backpack too heavy, sneakers too clean. And I walked beside him, knowing I wasn't the same person who once felt like she had to beg for space in her own life. I was home now, in myself, in my son, in my story. I signed a deal for my second book in October. This one isn't about betrayal. It's about rebuilding. Not just after family wounds, but after any moment when life tells you, you don't matter. Because you do. We all do. Even when they try to convince you otherwise. Especially then. Some nights I still sit on the porch with a warm drink and think about everything that happened. I think about the version of me who gave too much, who thought silence was strength, who kept the peace at the cost of her own joy. I love her. She kept me alive. But I don't miss her. Because I became someone else. Someone braver. Someone louder. Someone more whole. And this version of me? She doesn't apologize for existing anymore. She writes, she rests, she plays, she says no, she loves hard. She walks away when she has to. She's the hero of her own story. And no one gets to edit her anymore.